Live from York, this is the Late Late Show with Christopher Vowles on Teachers Talk Radio.
Good evening and welcome. Tonight I will be considering Catholic education with religious education teacher and boarding house mistress Rebecca Paterson. So join us as we explore the relationship between teaching and calling, professional development as faith development, and the continuing value of a faith school education.
Live from York, this is the Late Late Show with Christopher Vowles on Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live on the Podbean app or desktop player. Just head over to www.podbean.com/lsw/TT Radio or search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TT Radio.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Sunday Late Show.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in.
And you're still listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Our little sound clip was a bit eager there. Hello everyone and welcome to the Sunday Late Show. Tonight you find me halfway through a cold and rather grey half-term holiday in rural North Yorkshire, still shaking off the last vestiges of a stubborn chest infection and preparing for the 4-week run to the Easter holidays, which for us recommences next week. For me, those 4 weeks will be particularly busy, comprising, as they typically do, IGCSE English speaking and listening tests for nearly every student in Year 11, second rounds of Year 13 mock exams, and a higher education and careers conference. I'm also now onto the final 2 units of my Church of England and Catholic Education Society MPQSL course, so have been spending a significant amount of time beefing up my knowledge on the theory and practice of organisational management and implementation. Mercifully, this half-term holiday has thrown up relatively little in the way of life admin, and it has been nice to catch up with some neglected reading, to get a long overdue haircut, and to start collecting some ideas together for my Teachers Talk Radio Connect presentation in Manchester on the 1st of March, when I'll be sharing some thoughts on what a Benedictine approach to teaching poetry might involve. To help me prepare my talk, I have spent the last few days replaying in my memory some of the best poetry lessons I have taught and observed with Year 11 in recent years. I've gone back to the rule of St. Benedict to see what meaningful parallels might be drawn between St. Benedict's group of disparate novice monks and my set of novice poetry students. I've been looking at the theme of listening in the Psalms, and I've been thinking about what students typically bring to their first readings of a new poem, and how the balance between teacher talk and teacher listening in the poetry classroom might be optimised. I have even begun to draft the outline of my talk, which is just one of many talks within the English Strand. So if you haven't yet picked up your tickets to this event, then log on to www.ttradio.org and click on the events tab, where you will find full details of the day's discussions. Designed as a multi-subject event, Teachers Talk Connect will feature talks, panel discussions and networking opportunities of interest to practitioners of English, maths, science, history, MFL, RS and many more. So if you are currently working in a 3 to 19 school or college, then your tickets are free upon application via our website. So why don't you come along and make some connections next Saturday? We'd be delighted to see you. This combination of half-term activities has given me an excellent opportunity to think about some of the wider implications of teaching and working in a faith school, and, in my own case, as an Anglican teacher employed in a Roman Catholic school for more than a decade. In the coming month, many of the senior students I teach will be making applications to attend the Lord's Pilgrimage this summer, in what has been proclaimed a Jubilee year by Pope Francis. The Jubilee theme of 2025 is Pilgrims of Hope, a year in which Pope Francis has written, renewed attention is to be given to ensuring, quote, We are capable of recovering a sense of universal fraternity and refuse to turn a blind eye to the tragedy of rampant poverty that prevents millions of men, women, young people, and children from living in a manner worthy of our human dignity. End quote. He then goes on to say, quote, the spiritual dimension of the Jubilee, which calls for conversion, should also embrace these fundamental aspects of our life in society as part of a coherent whole. In the realization that all of us are pilgrims on this earth, which the Lord has charged us to till and keep, may we never fail in the course of our sojourn to contemplate the beauty of creation and care for our common home. It is my hope that the coming Jubilee year will be celebrated and experienced with this intention too. Growing numbers of men and women, including many young people and children, have come to realize that care for creation is an essential expression of our faith in God and our obedience to his will. End quote. It seems a distinctly counter-cultural message that what ought to concern us all at the moment is the counsel of hope, given that despair would appear to be a wholly appropriate human response to some of the political, social, and ethical atrocities we have seen committed at home and abroad since the inherently more upbeat backdrop of the last Jubilee in the year 2000. A lot has changed since then, of course. So what has pilgrimage, hope and faith got to do with 21st century English schooling, you might ask? Well, I'm delighted to say that we have the perfect guest to help us explore this theme and others in the form of Rebecca Paterson, a current colleague of mine with experience of the Catholic education system in the UK and overseas. Some of the strands I'd like to explore with Rebecca include the relationship between a teaching vocation and a faith life, differences in Catholic education practice in England and beyond, and the place of faith school education in 21st century Britain. Rebecca began her teaching career in a mixed Catholic comprehensive in Warwickshire in 2004. She started as an unqualified teacher, then went on to gain her QTS through the GTP route at Warwick University in 2006. And she's never left Catholic education since, teaching in single-sex schools, boarding, day and international schools. The one thing she has identified that they have in common is that they are all Catholic. In these schools, she has been head of RE, head of sixth form, assistant head of formation, and is now a house mistress. She currently teaches RE at a mixed Catholic boarding school, where she is also a house mistress in charge of the pastoral welfare of 60 girls aged 13 to 18. And I'm delighted to say that Rebecca joins us on the line now. Good evening to you, Rebecca, and thank you for joining us on Teachers Talk Radio, the home of education conversation tonight.
Good evening, Christopher.
Great to have you with us.
Thank you.
I wonder if you might start, Rebecca, by considering your route into teaching. What was it that brought you into the classroom, and was it the career path you always envisaged pursuing?
So for me, it wasn't something that I'd always envisaged pursuing. I always feel that it's a bit like any vocation, that you're sort of drawn to it. And I think when you ask anybody who becomes a priest or a nun, they usually say, no, I didn't actually want to be that thing, but I feel that God brought me towards it. And I think in the same way that that's how I was drawn to teaching. Teaching's in my family. Almost everyone's a teacher. And that's what made me absolutely certain that I wasn't going to be. However, that was not to be the way. And I had decided to initially pursue law. My A-levels were all science. I hated that. They didn't go well. I didn't like it. And I decided I would pursue a theology degree, because then I could do something like law and I'd have that sort of ability to analyze text and things like that. And so I then went on to get a place on a law conversion course after my degree. But I then thought, well, actually, somebody's asked me to teach. A friend of mine said, well, there's a job at a local Catholic school. And I thought, well, this would give me a great opportunity to gain all the money that I needed to do my law conversion. I did a year. I really enjoyed it. I loved being with the children. I loved being part of that community. And then I thought, well, what's the harm in doing one more year? And I did another year, and I thought, well, I'm going to make this useful. I'm going to qualify at the same time. And once I got my qualification, I never looked back, and I decided that law wasn't for me and that I was going to continue to pursue that. But I honestly believed that there was a providence in that, and that was just where I was led. And particularly when I was looking at my second post, obviously I prayed about it, and I felt that I was definitely led there, and that was it. After that, I was in.
And how important was faith education in your own schooling before you came to this realization that you wanted to work in faith schools?
I mean, my education was very formative. I went to a Catholic primary and a Catholic secondary, in the sense that A, it was a good experience, and B, it taught me that sense of community. So it allowed me to experience faith as a real thing, not just something that we talk about in schools. It showed me the purpose of education, the fact that it's to contribute to society. And we talked about vocation in our schools rather than careers or jobs. And the idea, we really felt that there's this sense that you were to flourish, develop a moral compass. And we were given a guidance for our future lives based on these gospel values, such as the fact that we're all made in the image of God. Charity is important, kindness is important, peace starts at home, these types of things. And I think that was very formative in terms of my education. And then when I went in finally to become a teacher, I knew how to be and to live and live within these schools and these communities, because I'd had it as a child.
And how is that faith expressed in that primary school environment? How does that work?
Yeah, I mean, in the primary school, it was very much sort of, done in a sort of like, let's talk about Jesus, and let's look at how he did things and how we would apply that to our own lives. And it was a basic, but obviously my mother, well, not obviously, but my mother is a Catholic, and that happened. You have that formative experience at home. Catholic schools do believe that the primary educators of their children, are their parents, and that the school sort of partners with that. That's really important. It's a really clear value in Catholic education. But I think that also there you're giving the basis of sort of what's called Catholic social teaching, where you're giving the idea of that we should have a priority towards the poor, that there's an idea of fairness, and that we're all really important in the eyes of God, that no one person is more important than the other. And that certainly is instilled from primary school, very much so.
And what about your secondary schooling experience? What was that like?
Yeah, and then you sort of grow up and you go into secondary school, and I'm thinking that I'm not sure that this would, in fact, I'm pretty sure that the basics of this haven't changed today, that you go and then there's a chaplaincy and children are involved there, and that we offer children retreats. I went on a retreat, that you continue in your sacramental education, that you have but now we used to take our first Holy Communion when we were 7, and then our confirmation when we were 11, but now the church has thought that actually is that we need to push that back until the children are more mature, and that we make that full commitment to our faith at the age of 13, which I think is absolutely right. And that we explore that within that secondary and a more sort of, advanced thinking in terms of our sacramental life. And we build upon that, and you become, rather in primary school when you're taught, in secondary school, what's happening is you're becoming more of you need to be a leader now, you need to go out, and it's becoming I suppose it's from being a disciple to learning how to be an apostle, really.
It's interesting, this idea of discipleship and apostleship. How do you see them as different?
I mean, well, a disciple is one who learns, and an apostle is somebody who goes out, and that's really it. And so this apostolic life in the church is really important. And there is certainly, there is certainly a division between those two. We don't expect, little children, primary school children, to be the children who will go out. And obviously we expect them to act in the way that they do it in that way. And there was I suppose it's a really good quote from St. Francis of Assisi, and he says, go out, preach the gospel, use words if you have to. And I suppose that's what we expect in all our students, that actually you shouldn't really have to talking about the gospel, you should live your life in those gospel values. And I think in secondary school, that's where that really comes to fruition.
And have you noticed how it ties in with your understanding of that wider development of the individual? I'm particularly thinking of the equivalent in the state school system, the PSHCE program. How do you see the kind of wider moral social teaching as slotting in alongside the education things that these schools do?
Yeah, I mean, certainly in terms of the PSHE program and the RSE, which is relationships and sex education, it's important. Catholic schools have always believed that it's important that children understand and, know their social responsibilities and their responsibilities to themselves in regards to their relationships and the way that they behave sexually. And the church has been totally on board and built those programs with the government, in fact, and so we absolutely align ourselves with that, and we teach exactly what the Lord tells us to do. We do not step outside of those things, but within that there is that extra element of character formation. So how do we conduct ourselves here? What does it mean about our individual dignity and the dignity of others? And I think that actually in PSHE, although we're looking at dignity and they are looking at people's right to express themselves in any way that they want to, but also within the Catholic Church, it's also saying, how do you do that? Respect yourselves and respect God and respect each other. I don't think that's always asked in non-church schools.
And if we go back to your childhood experience as well, then, Rebecca, how significant was the parish as an educator in your personal case?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question, because for me, we attended, I think these things have changed, particularly post-COVID. The parish was a formative educator in our schools, and the primary school particularly was connected to the parish, because the priest would come and he would teach us how to do our first communion and our confirmation. And then on Sundays, we would all go to church and see each other at church. So we would meet at school and we would meet at church. And I think with, how life has become busier in the last sort of 30, 40 years, that those things have diminished somewhat, and that actually people come from further afield as well, or they might go to school in one place but go to church in another place. And I think with those sorts of developments within society, that parish connection is not always there. It is, luckily, where I am and where I send my child to school. We live in a parish where the church and the school are very connected. But previously, when I've worked in London, that's not always the case, and we find it difficult sometimes to make those connections. But it's not like the will is not there. The will's always there in terms of the want of that connection, but it's not always as possible as when it was when I was a child. And we would know all the priests and by name, and we would look forward to having them to come in to do our assemblies and things like that.
I suppose today, with society being more mobile, perhaps the parish has a different place in people's consciousness. How permanent was it in your consciousness when you were growing up?
That's again a really good question. I think for me, it was very much so. I mean, we also had, I was part of school, St. Peter and St. Paul's, and then we had St. Patrick's, which was down the road, and all these three primary schools were connected to the one church, and it was very much a conscious place where the priest was seen to do other things, and and he came into the schools, and it was very active. But I think that now I would suggest that though the priest is very important, quite rightly, that within parishes that there are other people working towards the growth of the church, and that vocation doesn't just lie with the priest. And in fact, it's not expected that the priest should do this on his own, that there are other people doing children's liturgy, doing St. Vincent de Paul's Society, doing the Rosary and things like that. And all of these people are drafted in, all of these people have a vocation. So I would say that in one extent, the importance of the parish has diminished within a primary school to some extent. However, it's become bigger in other places, and it's developed much wider than it was when I was a child, giving lots more opportunities to other people, because of this ability to communicate and to travel from further afield. So it's had one effect one way, but actually allowed us to develop in another.
Thank you. I suppose this is quite an important question too, in the specific Roman Catholic context of the way church is done. Growing up as a young girl, did you notice any particular avenues for women within the church that you thought might be really worth pursuing?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, one of the things that are currently closed to Catholic women is priesthood, but I never really saw this as a barrier, and it was not. Something that I personally wanted to pursue. But in terms of women, we're never told, and this is one thing that I think is really important to emphasize here, we're never told, oh, this is a good job for a woman, particularly. But I do think that women have been much more part of, Catholic education, and I think that since I was a child, that I've been exposed to far more educated Catholic women who are having these discussions in education and within parishes and making their voice known. And for me, there were strong Catholic influences as women, and really those people were in my family. And also, we were given lots of role models as women. We were saying, oh, look at this woman, St. Teresa of Avila, Dorothy Day, St. Mother Teresa. And all of these people were given as good examples to us of strong Catholic women, but we didn't expect that we had to then go and be a nun, but we knew that we could do these things in other ways. Because I remember being given the example of St. Teresa of Lisieux, who was a really interesting woman, whom they said, look, she didn't do anything, in terms of some massive miracle and turn the whole place around. But what she did was she was the saints of little ways, and she did good things every day and was kind every day. And the through this way, this is the way to saintliness, this is the way to holiness. And so it seemed really attainable as a woman or as a child to be able to live like these saints, and they weren't made something that was unattainable.
Yeah, it's certainly interesting. I mean, I come from the Anglican tradition, of course, and within that tradition, we're largely confined to pre-Reformation saints in our kind of view of the world. So it's interesting to think about the range of role models that are there for post-Reformation saints in the Roman Catholic Church. Are there any particular saints that are held up as being particularly powerful role models for women in the 21st century, would you say?
Absolutely. So, recently one of the saints becoming more famous is St. Josephine of Bakita, Bakita, and she was a saint who, obviously post-Restoration, who had been a slave, who had worked her way out of slavery and just kept forcefully moving herself forward. And we have, I was just thinking about actually this idea of womanhood and saints, and actually it's because of the Catholic Church really that we have some of the women's writings. So for example, we have Julian of Norwich. Her writings could have been destroyed if it wasn't for the nuns in Stanbrook nuns, who are now in North Yorkshire, who saved her writings from Nazi Germany and rewrote the whole book out and brought it to England to save her writings. And it was actually because of the Protestant Reformation and their I don't know how to say this, Christopher, because I know you're Church of England, but their dislike of Marian of the Marian tradition, that they didn't really want these writings of women, and they labelled them as femina, and they were put in some dark corner. But it was the Catholic Church that actually saved those writings and brought them forward because of their devotion to Mary. So because we've always had this the Mother of God, who we've had in an exalted place, the Theotokos, she's known as the God bearer, who has given us the word of God, I think that women have always been valued in the church and have always been given that special place. And although not always recognized in terms of, we might say that, okay, so priesthood might not be for women, but that doesn't mean that there aren't role models for women. Particularly, I've never felt that.
Thank you. That's good to hear. I suppose when we talk about Catholic education as well, Rebecca, another question for you really, I suppose, is how do you see that as different from a more general Christian education?
Yeah, I mean, Christian education, as we know, is I think, I'd say as we know, but I certainly think it is the best type of education in terms of it always knows what it stands for. It's had its values. It's very clear. We don't change them with certain educational thinking. They're clear. So Catholics have always done education well in the sense that it's a really sort of conscious partnership between parents, parish, the community, and the school. But Christian education always brings Christ into its education. But in my opinion, I think Catholic education places Christ right at the center of everything. So for example, even its curriculum. So when a Catholic school develops its curriculum, all subjects are asked to have that foundational scholarship based on the teachings of the church and the gospel's values. So for example, what are the other learning opportunities here? how might we relate it to our religious values? It's markedly different in the fact that it overtly does God, whereas in some Christian schools, they can sometimes shy away from that because, they claim it's a Christian foundation. But for Catholics, it's the foundation, it's the middle, and it's the roof. The schools are meant to represent this message of hope. I mean, you were talking about earlier about your poetry and how to sort of work in this idea of Benedictine scholarship through poetry. That's what Catholic schools do. They'll take their particular charism and they will work that through with the gospel values, and they will see how can that curriculum be designed so that we can truly live the challenging mission of Jesus. So every policy, every curriculum is designed around gospel values, and it's this idea that we sort of build that as a reality on earth in our schools through these vehicles. And I would say that was the difference.
Thank you. That's really quite a good explanation, I think, for how you see things kind of coming together within that particular faith tradition. I wonder also the significance of the various seasons of the year, of course. How are the church seasons brought into this experience, in your view?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, so we live our life around the liturgical calendar. So currently we're about to go into Lent, which is the preparation for Easter. And within that, again, in the schools, Catholic children will be told, right, well, this is Lent. This is the time where you make your sacrifices. This is the time where Jesus did 40 days, 40 nights in the desert. This is your time to either give up or to do something for others. And so it's that, that link to the liturgical calendar in our everyday life. Traditionally, it's a time for Catholic children to raise money for others in this way by giving something up or doing something. And then we move into ordinary time, and then we go back again through to Advent and then Christmas. And all of these times are lived within the school, and they're very much present. And yeah, so although we have the school calendar, the liturgical calendar is present. And of course, in a Catholic school, the children will see that with different colours on the altar at different times. And so, yeah, it's a visual and a present in what we're doing as a school.
Well, thank you for sharing your teaching origin story with us, Rebecca. That's really helpful, I think, in exploring how we're going to develop through the rest of the show. And it's really quite fascinating to hear your perspective on precisely what you think Roman Catholic teaching does and its sense as a vocation. And we often hear teaching compared with vocation, don't we? But
Me too.
it seems that from what I've observed from my colleagues in my present educational setting, it really is a vocation for so many of them. It's really very clear to me that they know what they're there to do and why they're there to do it. So in the second part of the show, I'd like us to look a little bit more closely at your experiences of Catholic education in different parts of the UK and in different international contexts, and see if we might explore the idea of the professional development journey as a faith journey. And we'll be right back after this.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
To Schools Week, Oak National Academy have announced the appointment of a new interim CEO. This comes as the online school sets a leaving date for its current boss, Matt Hood, now due to step down at the end of March. Director of Product and Engineering John Roberts is named as the temporary leader. Roberts was part of the team that launched the organisation 5 years ago. In the article, Roberts is quoted as saying, "Oak has an important role to play going forward, supporting curriculum standards, tackling workload and innovating using AI." Matt Hood had acted as interim chief executive since Oak became an arm's-length public body in 2022. The recruitment process for Hood lasted a year, and the Department for Education confirmed his appointment to a permanent position in May 2024. Oak have stressed that Hood's permanent replacement will be selected following the principles of the public appointments process. Schools Week reported in November that a judicial review of the decision to turn the Oak National Academy into a government quango had been put on hold due to concerns expressed by other groups that Oak would pose an existential risk to their sector. Oak published its last impact report in October, which said more than 1 in 3 teachers had used Oak resources between February and July last year. Almost 75% said its resources had saved them time over the same period. BBC Tees focuses on the issue of young carers being, in the words of a local head teacher, unfairly marked as late to school as a result of having to drop off siblings. 4 areas in the northeast of England, including Newcastle and Sunderland, have the highest rate of school absences in the country, according to the Northern Powerhouse Partnership. The head of a school in the region spoke to the BBC and said it was unfair to mark child carers as absent because they had responsibilities, such as helping a disabled parent to get out of bed. He went on to say that changes to attendance guidance had created an unfair system, meaning lateness after registers closed resulted in a U mark for an unauthorised absence for a morning session, even if the pupil was only half an hour late. The head teacher went on to say that the reality was that these pupils were at school most of the day. Analysis of the Department for Education figures by the Powerhouse found that the top 9 areas for unauthorised absence were in the north. Northern Powerhouse Partnership CEO said the figures were indicative of high levels of deprivation and an educational north-south divide. A spokesperson for the Department for Education said it had inherited an absence crisis, but was laser-focused on tackling the problem. The Guardian covers a story about a secondary school head teacher who has obtained a court order to be paid damages in the settlement of a legal claim against abusive parents who he alleged launched a campaign of harassment against him. The head teacher was successful in his claim against the parents of 2 former pupils who he said had been harassing him since May 2023. The parents' alleged behaviour included starting an online petition to remove the head teacher from his role and establishing Facebook groups and Instagram accounts which encouraged online abuse against him. The couple were also accused of confronting the head teacher and the school's co-chair of governors outside their homes, although the couple denied this. The legal settlement was reached in January and the couple agreed to pay £10,000 in costs and damages, and agreed to multiple restraining and non-harassment orders. Full details of the story can be found online. Finally, the BBC West Midlands News website reports on a primary school who have begun training pupils in Year 5 and Year 6 to be mental health ambassadors. The school in Wolverhampton has begun teaching a programme to help children manage emotions following investment from West Midlands Violence Reduction Partnership. 20 pupils, including those with special educational needs, are being taught how to be upstanders so they can look out for younger children. Upstanders look out for those who might be being bullied and show that bullying is not okay. The upstanders wear high visibility blue jackets on the playground during break, and younger pupils can ask them for help. The scheme has had a positive impact on the school, says the report. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
Welcome back to our show on Catholic education in the UK and beyond with teacher and boarding house mistress Rebecca Paterson. In the first section, Rebecca described the nature of her journey into classroom teaching and the faith upbringing that was to prepare her for a career in Catholic education. Now, Rebecca, I wonder if you might share with us your observations on the diversity of Catholic education practices you've experienced it. I know we've been working together for a few years now, but I don't think I've ever asked you directly about your early career. So where did your career as a Catholic educator begin? What was your first school like?
My first school was a lovely school, a very comprehensive school called Bishop Ullathorne in Coventry in Warwickshire. And it was a really sort of safe haven, just on the outskirts of the city, in quite a sort of an okay area of the city, but next to a not so okay area of the city. I don't know how else to describe that. But the children came from all around, and they were predominantly Catholic, because that was just the nature of the school, and choice was easier then in terms of people getting the schools that they wanted. And but I think it's worth noting that here just quickly that 30% of children at Catholic schools are not Catholic, because this is a choice that sometimes parents make for their children. And it was a really lovely school, mixed comprehensive. And when I say mixed comprehensive, very, very comprehensive, in the sense that we sent a child to do medicine at Oxford. We also we didn't send them, but a child also went to prison for a year for doing something naughty as well. So when a very, very comprehensive school. But, the children were delightful. They were down to earth. They were humorous. And it's where I sort of first understood the idea of pastoral relationships and how getting to know the children and working with them in a kind of, it wasn't a Salesian school, but Salesians believe in mixing with the children and being with the children and getting to know them and what's important to them and meeting them where they are. And I felt that school very much took that approach, and I wasn't on my own. There were, in that sense, I felt all the other teachers were doing that, and everyone was pulled in as a community of teachers to meet the children where they were. And that was so I had a really lovely experience with my first school. I had a great head of department who taught me the ropes and sort of gave me responsibilities where she felt that I could, and developed me, and certainly gave me the opportunities that I needed to develop even further. But really nice school.
And was there any part of the induction process specifically directed towards the Catholic nature of that teaching environment?
Yeah. Absolutely. So in all Catholic schools that I've been in, there's always an induction in terms of, this is a Catholic school, here's what we expect from our students, but here's what we expect from our staff, and what we're here to do, to make sure that children are religiously literate, that we have an important part in the formation of our children, and that you are there to do this. Now, lots of people in Catholic schools are not Catholic, but one of the things that they're asked to do is to support the ethos of the school. And many teachers have absolutely no problem with doing that, and in fact most of them, and that's why they're there. And if they weren't supportive, they wouldn't be there. There are many teachers in Catholic schools who are not Catholic but supportive of our aims and values, and see the value in that as well.
And who was delivering this induction training for you? Was it coming from the church, or was it coming from within the school?
No, so it always came from within the school. It depends on which school actually, but there were times where you had a bit from the church. The parish priest would come. In my first school, it came from the director of religious education, the head of religious education, who was also an assistant head teacher, and she would deliver that, and she'd say, this is the social teaching of our school and church. These are the things that we expect of staff. If you have any problems, we're open to answering any questions and things like that. Obviously, I didn't have any problems or questions. I went in with my eyes wide open, and I think most people did. And I have to be honest with you, I don't know anybody that's sort of in any of the schools that I've been in thought, gosh, I can't stand this. I have to leave. I can't deal with this Catholic situation. I mean, they might have left for other reasons, but it wasn't that.
I suspect they might have learnt something from the various crosses in every room as they entered their first teaching lesson. And what about the highlights of working in that first school, Rebecca? Can you take us through some of those?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the major highlights was that it was my first experience of mixing with children and teaching them in a classroom environment, but also teaching them outside, taking them on trips, spending time with them on retreats. And so mixing with them in a sort of, I suppose, an appropriately social way, and as well as a classroom, so formally and informally, and building those relationships. And I say that the highlights were those sorts of extracurricular opportunities that meant when you came back into the classroom that you knew those children and you'd spent time with them, where it wasn't just about them having to learn and you having to teach, and there wasn't there wasn't that sort of that high stakes environment. It was just, we're sitting here having a cup of tea and we're going to go and do this next, and it was that experience really that I feel in some ways helped develop the classroom relationships. And that was my first experience of mixing with children on, in any level, and then having to teach them formally. But I really felt that those experiences outside of the classroom helped me develop those relationships inside.
It might be worth just explaining what you mean by the term retreat, Rebecca, for our listeners
Yes.
who may not be familiar with that concept.
So a retreat is something that's open to all the children in a Catholic school, every single Catholic school, independent and state. And you'll take maybe it's usually done in year groups, and you'll take a day out. And it's really important within a Catholic school that children have this opportunity. And I've never met one that doesn't offer it to its children once a year, where they come off timetable and they'll have a particular theme to discuss and to go with, a day where they take time out of the school and they pray and they think about a particular theme. Now, sometimes in the past, I've been on ones where it's developed for a particular year group. So something might be happening in that year group, and it might be friendships. And so we would take a particular example of a saint or a person who's built up friendships and how they do that in particularly difficult times or whatever. And then we have maybe in sixth form, it might be about moving on and how we continue with our faith if we're moving on. How do we develop our faith and continue with our faith when we're not in a faith environment such as university? And it's taking time for usually a whole day to pray and to think about and engage in discussion intellectually and spiritual contemplation of that particular theme.
I didn't catch all of that. Sorry, your microphone's going a bit faint at times. Would you mind just repeating that last little bit?
Yes, sorry. And so it's time, and I was saying that it's themed, and that usually it would be to do if a year group had a particular something going on, and that, so friendships maybe in year 10, and maybe in year 13 it would be something like moving outside of a faith environment and how to cope at university, and how one might continue to practice their faith at university.
Thank you. And what about the teaching of the curriculum in that first school? How did you find that?
Yes, so we had it was the days of levels. Do you remember that, Christopher? Levels in year 9.
I've tried to blank it out of my memory, but it is still there somewhere.
Yeah. So we had a curriculum that's always based on what's called the religious curriculum directory, provided by the Catholic Education Services for RE. And the Catholic Education Service always sort of works in trend with the government, so they will have the government expectations, but the religious education curriculum directory outlines what it wants to be taught in the schools, and we still have this today. And so in year 9 we would have to cover certain topics, and then obviously we did a GCSE, which was a Catholic base, and then at A level we would do philosophy and ethics. It's called religious studies, but it's philosophy and ethics. And the curriculum there was very much based around, again, thematic, as opposed to you wouldn't be looking at particular saints, but within the themes you might. I know I keep mentioning saints, but I'm trying. What I'm saying is we look at examples of real life people to show these behaviours, and how Catholics might choose to mimic those behaviours in their own life. And when I'm talking about Catholic education as well, I want to make it clear that in the classroom, it has a very much academic approach, in the sense that we don't say to children, this is what we believe. You talk about it objectively as opposed to subjectively. And we would say to children, this is what Catholics believe. This is what they believe. This is what they do. This is how they practice it. And yes, and obviously children have questions which you can answer. What do we believe in? And you can answer that in that moment. But it's very much taught as an academic curriculum. The classroom, although there are learning opportunities and spiritual opportunities, it's approached in a very educational, academic way. And chaplaincy is for that time to answer those questions about our faith, and RE is a time to answer those questions about what religious people believe.
Thank you. So it sounds like you were enjoying your time as a teacher in your very first school.
Yes.
So what prompted your move to the Cayman Islands?
So as an RE teacher, there are very few opportunities to work abroad. And I mean, if I was teaching maths, I could work anywhere I wanted to. But I was young but not young, so I was 29, 30, and I thought to myself, these opportunities are far and few between. And it actually came through a friend, and he said, look, they're looking for a head of RE out in the Cayman Islands and in the Catholic school there. Would you be interested? I said, well, I might be. And so I went along to another Catholic school in London to meet with the lady that was going to be head of the school that year, and I interviewed with her and I got the job. And yeah, and I think and I just thought, wow, I've got to take this opportunity. So I was delighted, went out there, had a great time for 4 years teaching lovely children, mixing with nice people, and again engaging with another Catholic community that again had its similarities and differences. I mean, as we know, the word Catholic means universal, but I mean, in my experience, I think that Catholics, has a very different tradition all around the world. The belief's the same, but the way they practice it, very different. So yeah, I just thought, I've got to take this opportunity. And it was a British curriculum as well. I mean, how often does that come along? Hardly ever.
Yeah, not too often, I'd imagine.
Yeah.
And in terms of the practices that were different from home, what did you notice?
I mean, so obviously culturally it's different. So it's a Caribbean island. It's actually a very formal place to live. And when I first got there, manners are very formal, and it almost felt like a sort of 1950s vibe where everybody addressed each other, by their surname. And they have this thing out there where you wouldn't just say, oh, hi, Rebecca, nice to meet you. You'd be like, oh, hello, Miss Rebecca. And it was like that, which I found very quaint and a bit old fashioned, but it was a respectful thing. And in terms of the practices within the church and the school, so when we talk about parish and church, in Cayman, they were very, very much together. So the church was right next to the school. The priest was the overall executive head of the school. We had a head of secondary and a head of primary, and they very much worked in tandem together. And there the priest called the shots, and we were bizarrely, even though we were in the Caribbean, we were then connected to the Diocese of Detroit in America. So it had three elements. It had that American element, that Caribbean element, and that British element, all living on this island. And I remember one child saying to me, my dad said that Cayman's like Martin Luther King's dream. Everybody just exists here, all together, all as one. I think I thought that was quite sweet at the time, and I look back on it and I think that's probably right. And the church out there was doing a great job engaging people, and being a presence there, a really good presence on the island, socially and spiritually, and they did good work for people there. It wasn't just in terms of providing services, but they provided critical social provision as well.
And in terms of the practice in the classroom, Rebecca, how were the curriculum and inspection frameworks different on Cayman as compared with the UK?
So that's really interesting. So in the fact that they did have only just, when I was there, I'd had started to look at inspection, and the whole time I was there, we were never inspected. But they did look at the British, they were using the British criteria, the Ofsted criteria at the time. And in terms of inspecting religious education, that didn't happen. The church was expected to get on with it and to provide its and was free to provide its religious education as it chose. And it was the same in other schools on the island. So the Catholic Church had to be a private school because government school, there were 3 government schools there, and most people on the island are immigrants, including myself. I was an immigrant. And if you are coming to the island on a work permit, you're not allowed to attend state school. You have to pay for your education. So all of these schools are private schools, and they all have their lots of them have their own Christian vision, and the government seemed to be happy to do that. I mean, one of the weird things about the government there, because I went to a few government meetings whilst I was there, is that it would never happen here, where they started the meeting with a prayer. So just a council meeting or the Department of Education. And I mean, I did find that quite different. And so there was a kind of a clear religious freedom, but obviously as long as it was Christian. But so they just let the school get on with it. And in terms of standards of education, they've only really just in the last 5 or 6 years started to inspect properly, rigorously and robustly there.
And in terms of the state schools available on Cayman, were there any particular faith schools that were available to state school children?
None. So no state schools available for children, but most children are Christians. So it was a Caribbean island, very traditional. Lots of children are coming from Jamaica, the Philippines. And so the predominant religion in Jamaica is Christian, and they would attend the Church of God. And so they might start their day with a prayer in a state school, but they were not religious schools.
So that sounds more like the American experience then.
Yeah.
Is there quite a strong separation between church and state in their education system?
I mean, exactly. They say that there is, a bit like America. They say that there's a strong separation, but not really, because they would start, as I say, they had to start meetings with prayers. They would sing a hymn at assembly, and but yes, essentially yes, but in practice no.
Yeah, so at the level of the institution, yes, but actually the people going there, there's more of a connection than might initially appear. Thank you. And you now, of course, work as a house mistress and a Christian theology teacher and a lay chaplain, I think, in one of the UK's leading Roman Catholic boarding schools. How is religious education and religious formation done differently in this environment, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, you're presented with a unique opportunity at boarding school, which is that the children are here day and night, and that you are literally a house parent, and that is what the parents expect you to act as whilst they're not there with their children. And so, it's religious education's the core of the curriculum in any school, and they place it there to sort of, the Catholic Church says that we must place it at the core of our curriculum, and it helps the church to fulfill its mission to educate the whole person. And here, am I allowed to say the name of my school, Christopher?
Of course you are, yeah.
And here at Ampleforth College, that's what we're concerned with. So, as with all Catholic schools, but we have that opportunity, that wider ability to help them flourish in every aspect of their thinking, ethically, theologically, understand that the demands that they're under, and the ability to accompany the children here is so much easier because they live here. This is their home, and we're able to do that through our system. So we're lucky enough to have a Benedictine monastery. So we are a Benedictine charism. We try to live our life like under the rule of St. Benedict, and part of that is accompaniment, that we accompany our students on their journey of faith, that we're just there for them, that if they need it, some direction, that you'd be surprised, or you wouldn't be surprised, but people might be surprised, how often children seek your advice. Is this right? Am I thinking in the right way? And although it's not for us to tell them necessarily always you're thinking in the right way, but it's a gentle redirection based on our understanding of gospel values under the rule of St. Benedict. And and in a world where everything seems so relative, and everybody, this is completely right if you think it, here it's quite clear, like, some thinking is actually not right, and we do say that, no, that's not right. And so I think here as I say, we have that unique opportunity to give that direction very clearly to the children that we look after, that we're lucky enough to look after.
And I suppose too, there must be benefits and challenges that come with the taught faith and the lived faith being so tightly intertwined. What would you like to say about those?
I think the benefits are that you feel that connection to somebody, and that you know that when it goes right, you think, oh, that's really good. I feel like I've helped that person. And then of course that when it goes wrong, you think, oh gosh, that's my fault. That's my fault that they behaved like that they were provoked into behaving like that. I should have done more, because you live with them, you work with them, you care about them, and it's difficult not to take it personally. I think that is one of the non-benefits.
So what have you learnt then over the course of this career so far, Rebecca, about the potential for schools to act as faith communities, lively, passionate places where faith is lived, experienced and taught every day?
I think that I've learned within my time doing Catholic education, there are some really motivated individuals that are working hard for the church, that are working hard for Christ, that are working hard to present this authentic vision of the church's moral and social teaching, so that children can ultimately make a critique, I suppose, of underlying trends in contemporary culture and society, in the sense that I have never been in any of my schools and not seen lots of people working hard for these children. So in Catholic faith, in Catholic education, that absolutely exists. And I did I don't have a lot to compare it with, as you know, but in my practice, so one of the things that I had to do in my teaching practice is that you must work in a radically different school. So I went to a non-faith school, and to me, it just felt that they were unsure about what they were there for, that some people were, although lots of people cared about the children in the same way that they do in Catholic schools, that they weren't actually really sure what they were doing and what they were doing there in terms of providing for the children, other than an education, other than an exam factory. And I think that is absolutely unique to Catholic schools, and I've seen that throughout my whole 20 years of teaching, that in every single school, the one thing is that there are dedicated individuals who really are promoting the Catholic faith and forming relationships with the children to help them understand themselves and form themselves so that they can face society today whilst having a faith.
Well, thank you very much for those thoughts and for taking us on such a fascinating tour of your teaching environments, actually, both in the UK and in the Cayman Islands. I mean, it's quite interesting to hear about the way faith kind of exists in the gaps between everything else, I suppose, in Cayman, in a way that perhaps isn't necessarily always the case, or isn't always visible to us in the UK.
Exactly. So society there is very religious, very Christian, and actually you would, you'd be step outside and you would be odd to say that you didn't have faith. Well, you just wouldn't say it. People just wouldn't say it at all. But one of the things, and I know this is going to sound strange, I felt that in the Catholic Church, as opposed to the other faith schools, the other Christian schools, is that we explore those questions, those ideas that might count against faith, and we'll say to children, these are some of the reasons why people don't believe in God. They are all quite reasonable. Let's discuss this. And, in the other schools, the other Christian schools on the island, that would just not be up for discussion. I think that the Catholic school promoted more of that Socratic questioning, more of those skills to help us think, theologically and become literate, and also understand why people don't think the same as us. And I really do think that the Catholic school on Ireland, here and in this country, provides that.
And do you think that's a confidence that comes from numbers of practicing Catholics worldwide, or do you think it comes from some other source?
No, I think that not from numbers. I think it comes from the Catholic Church always having been quite a theologically academic institution that is very self-reflective and content to question itself. Actually, I suppose it comes from, in my opinion, its Jewish roots of scholarship, where they were known to question God. I mean, it's very famously Job questions God, in the Old Testament, or the Torah. And, it says, why are you doing this? What's that for? You can't be right. Will you do this or will you do the other? And I think the Catholic Church has taken roots from that Jewish scholarship, and very much itself has that approach that these things are up for question, that, it's faith-seeking understanding. And through that, I mean, that's a very sort of classic line, that we have faith-seeking understanding, and that we are allowed to do that. We are allowed to question these things in order to further our understanding.
Well, thanks. I think in the final part of the show, we'd come back to some of those ideas, because I'd like us to consider the wider role that faith plays in guiding the lives of our students and young people in the 21st century. And we'll be right back after this.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Welcome back to the final part of our show on Catholic education with Rebecca Paterson. So far, we have considered the way in which a Catholic teaching career might be considered a very particular kind of calling, and we have discussed what a positive Catholic education might look like in a variety of different school contexts. But I wonder if we might explore what role faith authorities retain for themselves in the lives of young people taught in faith school settings. What do you think, Rebecca? Are today's students still influenced by people of faith in a world that seems to trumpet faithlessness and self-reliance almost everywhere we look?
I mean, absolutely. Of course, I'm going to say yes. Of course, I'm influenced by that because I see it every day. I see that obviously children are discerning in the same way that adults are. There are some people that they listen to in terms of their influence and faith, and they might dismiss them. They might think, no, I'm not sure about that. Maybe I'll come back to that later. But certainly, if they're presented by somebody who they see as authentic, who are living their life, who stimulate them to think about a further life that isn't just this, as I say, career economically driven world, that allows them to sort of see that actually I can do something else with my life. I don't have to do A, B, C, or D, but I can actually give of my whole life as opposed to my whole job. My whole job could be a giving of a life to others. They absolutely are ignited by that. I've seen it happen, and it still happens today as it did 20 years ago. I mean, if a child comes to a Catholic school and they've been sent here by their parents, we're already, on a winning ticket, so to speak, because the parents have engaged and the child is engaged. I feel like sometimes it's up to us to lose them rather than win them. But there are some children who come in and they are neither somebody interested or disinterested, but they are children who will open themselves up. And I mean, I'm thinking of one particular child that I can think of who said, when I first came here, I didn't really believe in God, and and I'm not saying that I've massively changed it and she hadn't had a sudden faith conversion, but she said that it had opened her up and she was willing to listen, and it had made a change to her life, the people that she'd heard speak, the people she was mixing with, and that actually that she felt very influenced by it. And although she still had some of her original thoughts that she came in with, that she felt much more warm towards it. And having lived with us as a community, she knew that the Catholic Church and the people that she lived with were good people who were seeking to help children flourish. I think the thing to say here is, I think that the church and the people who work in the church, are perfectly aware that the rest of the world do not think that it's a normal way to live. We know that we're not living in this idea that everybody sees and understands us, but what we are doing, we've got nothing to hide. That's the difference between a religion and a cult. The church we are a religion, we're not a cult. We're open, everything's out there, everything's up for discussion, and certainly children are influenced by that, because if they I think they could, the good thing about children is not to underestimate them, because they can certainly sniff out something that they think is a bit dodgy, and they just will be completely put off by that. And in my experience, they don't, and they ask difficult questions sometimes, but they're happy to listen to the answer, and they are certainly influenced by good people of faith, definitely. Does that answer the question? Have I talked too much?
I think it does to some degree. So there's a sense, I suppose, you're suggesting to me that there's a kind of positive peer influence that comes from the other children themselves that operates effectively on each one of them individually, but as a collective too. I mean, one of the nicer experiences I have had in my current school is the day I walked down to Mass in our boarding house and bumped into two boys who were walking down to Mass in their boarding house at the same time. And we were talking about how we were both on our way to Mass, and that's what we were going to be doing. And then I asked them a question about what their favourite part of Mass was. And they spoke to me about the prayers, actually. And I remember saying to them, it's quite odd, because when I was a a chorister at my church school, the favourite part of the service for me was the hymns and the anthems, because as a chorister, I thought, well, that's where I really get to do my thing and really show that I've got some value and worth in this place while I'm in that experience. And as I've grown up, I've always started to veer towards, I think, the prayer bit where I don't actually have to say anything and just listen. It's usually to one person standing at the front, going through the prayers for the day in our order of service, and just being able to empty my head and allow space for other things that should come to me from, I don't know, the altar or the front of the church or from the people behind me, or some kind of bigger essence in the space itself. And it really gave me a sense of how much those two boys were really starting to think about and explore what their faith meant to them in their particular context. I wonder if you've got any similar experiences.
Yeah. So one of the things that obviously that I've done in my career is that I have run these retreats that we talked about earlier, and within that we have mass, and maybe at some point we might have what's called Eucharistic adoration. And adoration is a part of, it's a liturgical service. It's not mass, but it's where the priest will place the body of Christ, which Catholics believe to contain the real presence of Jesus Christ, in what's called a monstrance, which is a sort of screen that shows the host. And we will kneel and we will pray, or we will sit and we will pray, and it will be, part of it will be led as a service, and then there will be maybe 10 minutes of silence of private prayer. And that can be part of a retreat as well. And we do all sorts of things throughout the day of the retreat. We might do activities, we might do creative things, we might do crafts, we might do fun games, and then we do adoration as well. And whenever I've given the children a survey, and I said, what's the best part of the day, and inevitably, 9 times out of 10, the majority of children say it's the adoration. That point in the day where they were silent and they were allowed to be with their thoughts, to pray to God if that's what they were doing, or just to be in silence and to just have that time, those 10 minutes in their very, very busy lives. And I remember we used to do one in one of the schools that I worked in. Again, it was in the Abbey, and it was a boys' school, and the boys were usually quite vivacious, is a nice way to put it. And they would, and we'd give them 15 minutes in the Abbey, and they could find wherever they would like to sit, and they just had to spend 15 minutes in silence. When we first did this, I thought, oh God, this is a bad idea. We need to we need to staff this really well. But they just went, they chose themselves as 30 boys, and they just sat quietly for 15, 20 minutes. And then when the bell was rung, and we came back to the middle, we said a prayer, and we left. So my experience is that silence is such an important, engaging part of their faith as well.
Sorry, Rebecca, your microphone's sounding a little bit muffled again at the moment.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Still a bit muffled.
Oh, I'm holding it up here. What about that?
It's a little bit better.
Okay, sorry, I'll hold it closer.
That's all right. So it sounds as well, this sense of creating a place for silence to happen with a kind of intention is something that's quite important.
Yeah.
And it's something, of course, that children very rarely have the opportunity to experience now in modern life, a kind of shelter from noise.
Exactly that. So, yeah, absolutely, that they experience that silence in their life, a shelter from the outside world, a quiet, protective, safe space for them to pray, to concentrate on their conversations with God, or just to be and allow God to speak to them if they open themselves up to it.
And if we think about the 29% of children attending Roman Catholic schools who identify as Roman Catholic according to the 2023 census for England, what do you think attracts pupils of other faith traditions to Roman Catholic schools?
That's a really interesting question, because one of the things that, particularly in London, in my experience as a teacher in London, I taught in Wimbledon, we would have a lot of children from Muslim backgrounds who would come to be in Catholic schools because their parents just wanted them to be in a school where people believed in God and that they had a faith and that there was a narrative to their lives that where God was involved. And it didn't have to be, Allah. It didn't have to be Elohim. It didn't have to be Yahweh, because it's really the same God and they know that. And so, but we didn't have to call it that. And they just were happy to have their children in a school where faith in God was important and that we had these values and that we lived our lives according to these values. So I think one of the other things is, particularly in independent schools, I think that parents are buying into this idea of they know that their children will be accompanied, that there is a particular set of values based on, virtue-driven education, and that it pervades absolutely everything. And we're clear where we stand. There's no ambiguity in what we're telling them. And I think that that's what parents appreciate, a clear, direct approach that that people can come to understand God if they wish to.
And in terms of the religious education experience then, how do children of other faiths typically respond to the moments of collective worship and the kind of Christian elements of whatever provision is provided for them?
Again, I mean, it's really clear when a child comes to a Catholic school what they're buying into. And so in the sense of, I've never had a child of another faith say, well, they might do before they join the school, I'd really prefer if I didn't go to Mass. Well, then this isn't the right school for you. Catholic schools are really clear about that. We're not asking you to believe it in your heart. We're not asking you to maybe say the prayers, but we are asking you to be present and respectful in the same way that I would happily be present and respectful in an Islamic service or a Jewish service. And so, you know what you came to when you joined the school. And so we didn't have a hidden anything from you. As you say, the crosses in every room were a bit of a clue, maybe having a chapel or a church attached to the school. And so it's a requirement that you're there. And, we'd love you to be open to that. So, and in terms of religious education, again, it's clear in the Catholic curriculum directory that we must teach about other faiths, because other faiths have value and that they have a light to the truth. And the church teaches that.
And how much space is given over to the teaching of other Christian traditions?
So it would be in other Christian traditions. That's a good question. So we would teach in year 9. Sorry, in Key Stage 3, other Christian traditions. We would say other Christians might think this. It's not a particular percentage of space, but certainly at GCSE, other Christian traditions are taught alongside Catholic traditions in order to give a different perspective. So, where you were talking about Catholic views, you would say other Christians might believe this. So 50% almost at GCSE.
And if we're thinking about England specifically, there's quite a significant number of quite important different Christian traditions. Are they aware of the difference, say, between a Methodist, an Anglican, and a Baptist?
That's a really good question. So for my whole teaching career, I've been having to find the best way to describe the idea of denominational. Obviously, we learn about the Reformation, and actually it's in year 9 that they learn about the different types of Reformation. So the European Reformation, the English Reformation, and the Counter-Reformation. And so that's why we have different types of Christian. But one of the younger Catholics will ask, when they're like 9 or 10, and it makes me laugh, is a Catholic same as being a Christian? Just say yes. But so they understand that there are Christians, that they think that Catholics are sometimes something else. But actually, of course, I explain it to them in terms of denominations. They are aware of Methodists and they are aware of Quakers, but they might not be aware that they're Christians. So that, because they are taught about these things. So I always describe it like this, and you can tell me whether this analogy is good, Christopher, but sometimes I say it's a bit like being sweeties. We're all in the sweet shop, but we're all different types. Some of us are whispers, some of us are fruit and nut, we might be Skittles, but we're all in the sweet shop. And they kind of get it from that.
Yeah, the nutty ones are always other people though, aren't they?
I don't know what you mean.
So when I was at my church school, I mean, it was a quite odd church school, an Anglican school, but quite a lot of children of clerics and ministers attended the school from loads of different denominations. So a significant proportion of our school were Roman Catholic because we were the closest thing to a Roman Catholic secondary school within the city, because there wasn't a Roman Catholic secondary school in Exeter at the time. I don't think there still is, actually. So they came to us. We had Baptists. So one of my friends in my RE class, his father was a Baptist minister. He was also the chaplain of Exeter City Football Club. And we had a friend of mine whose father is a United Reformed Church theologian at Exeter University, and people from other slightly more radical Protestant groups within the school too. So part of our RE programme was essentially a tour of everyone else's places of worship. And then we did our little bit on Islam too, fairly close to the end of year 10, I think. And then we sat our compulsory RE exam at the end of year 11. But we did get a sense, very powerful sense actually, even when we were listening to the various ministers coming in talking to us in assembly, that we were part of a bigger community, and that there were people that went to different places on Sundays to the places that we went to, and indeed some people even went on Saturday evenings to do things that were different from the things that we did too. And it was quite a powerful experience, actually. I remember going along to a Roman Catholic service on a Saturday night with two of my friends as part of our kind of exchange program, I suppose you would call it. And it was really quite an eye-opening experience, quite a powerful one, and quite interesting in helping you define where your own position was in relation to what you saw going on around you. I wonder if every Catholic school in the country has the opportunity to have quite such a wide-ranging experience of the broad Christian faith.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting question. And I would suggest that kind of discussion, the kind of discoveries that you had, becomes for our children more at A level between the 16 to 18. And so I would say no. I would say that, the GRE curriculums given to other teachers of religions is probably, we looked at it's probably like very, very, it's a small percentage, but it's there. But if you looked at other faith schools, there would be zero for other teaching of other religions, because that's why they're a faith school. But for us, we see that as really important. But in terms of other Christian denominations, I would say no up until the age of 16. They would learn, except obviously they say, when we're talking in terms of ethical, maybe in ethical subjects such as abortion, euthanasia, they would look at what other Christian denominations means, and actually probably just the Church of England. So yeah, I mean, there isn't that breadth there, but certainly when we come to A level, we learn a lot more about the Methodists and the Quakers in terms of interreligious dialogue, their views on secularism, things like that. But yeah, I mean, no is the answer to outside of anything other than the Church of England. And certainly we would recognise the value of the Methodists. For example, we'd be teaching about something with regards to education, and say, in England, the Methodists allowed for free education. They were the first people to say that it was important, and things like that. And then when we study things like peace, obviously the Quakers come up. But there is, we don't tend to, we do obviously in my current school, we do have an Anglican chaplaincy, which helps the Anglican children go through their sacramental journey of confirmation, and we feel it's important to provide for other Christians. But in terms of helping Catholic children explore other forms of Christianity, I think that we don't do that, but we obviously don't. We say that's up to you if you want to continue to please, and we would encourage them to look at that as well if they wanted to. So it's not something we're against, but it's not something that we necessarily do.
Okay, I suppose all of the different denominations that run schools would argue that we do still need faith school education in England. What do you see as the role of faith school education in what is essentially, we keep being told, a secular society?
Yeah, I mean, you've got the economic benefits, you've got the social benefits, you've got the spiritual benefits. the fact is that without church education or Catholic education in the school, we wouldn't have the education system that we have today. The church contributes something like 10% to the capital project costs of the state. So it financially contributes, and it always, and socially, I feel that this idea of not having faith schools, so not just Catholic schools, but faith schools, would be such, a terrible vandalism of our culture as a nation as well. I think that Catholic schools and faith schools contribute not just. I've got so much to say about this. That's why I'm sort of thinking about it. That without it, we wouldn't even. Without faith schools, I feel that we would not have a future. And to me, we would be lost in terms of where we're going spiritually and morally. How will we learn about social teaching? How will we understand our values and the basis of where they come? And I know that humanism would sort of say we can have that without God, but actually, for me, it's about purpose and about the idea of living and an existence. And I think that without almost, and then it sounds like a radical, not a radical statement, but a sort of really strong statement, that without faith schools, that we would have a severe existential crisis as a nation. That without these places to explore our faith, other people's faith, or even maybe entering a faith, that society would reach an all-time low. And that we provide, distinctive characteristics to the Catholic schools that I've already mentioned. That we have that formation of a moral compass, and it's got a clear basis as to why that moral compass is important, and it provides purpose.
Thank you. I think that's a good defence of the position. I wonder what you think about the church's wider good news for young people about the present and the future, particularly given the prevailing doom narratives that society seems so hooked on at the moment.
I mean, you're asking that in the current Jubilee year of hope, Christopher. So, one of the things that the church, says is that our lives are full of hope, that we have a lot of hope to give, and that our lives of Christians are different, that we don't just, I was doing this with children today, actually, in our children's institute church, that, to be a Christian is to be different. And it's not just to be good to the people that we like, it's to be good to the people that we don't like. And that's hard. And so I think that, I know what you mean in terms of this doom narrative, that there is no purpose and that we are all just milling along, that actually children don't want that, adults don't want that, people are not buying into that, and there's certainly, in terms of numbers of parents that want their children who are not Catholic, who might not even be religious, but would like their children in a faith school, they're literally putting their money where their mouth is, in their belief that this is going to provide them, a good social cohesion. They're going to contribute to the common good, and they're going to be good people when they come out of these schools. And so, although the modern world is providing this doom narrative, maybe in the media, that's not how it's being lived in reality. People are full of hope. The church provides a hope, and we literally are living it this year in terms of our Jubilee year, and saying to people, this is a life of hope. This is one where we do not have to live like this, that there is another way.
And does the church have a particular expectation as to what this year of hope might deliver for everyone?
Yeah, so it's this idea that we are pilgrims of hope, that we're all on this journey towards a hope, towards this vision of gospel values and living God's kingdom on earth, and that, not our everyday interactions might not provide us with hope, but ultimately hope is a journey, and that we can get there together, and it's much more hopeful within a community. The church, from its very origins as a community, and it was showing us how to live together, and we know that we're much more successful together. Even an atheist will tell you that societies that work together are more successful, and the church does that on the basis of its gospel values, and it's the idea that excuse me excuse me, sorry, Christopher, that we have a life of hope together.
And do you see its international perspective as being an important one?
Water. We have the numbers, don't we? I mean, Catholics is the universal church, are the universal church, and certainly that's one of the good things about our church is that we have that one narrative, and that universally we're saying to everybody all over the world, let's live this life of hope together. Let's live it in America. Let's live it in England. In however we want to do that, that means that we're living our life through these gospel values. But certainly, I think that in Europe, as opposed, I mean, I know everybody knows this probably, but in Europe, people feel that the church is diminishing. But actually, I was looking at this the other day, that there is this kind of, even the people who wrote this secularization thesis believe that it has actually failed, and that people may not be attending church and they may not have that church attendance, but spiritual ideas and religious ideas and belief is on the rise. So we are expressing those beliefs in different ways. So yes, I think that universally hope is abounding.
Well, I think that's a very positive and uplifting note to draw our conversation to a close with, Rebecca. So thank you so much for sharing your story, your experience, and your enthusiasm for Catholic and faith school education with us this evening. I think I calculated last week that I must have spent about 17 years of my life either studying or working in a faith school environment, and yet I've learnt a lot more about faith education from our conversation tonight, and I hope our listeners have too. Of course, I am very conscious as well that we're recording this conversation while the Holy Father is currently pretty ill in Gemelli Hospital in Rome. So let us hold him in our prayers tonight and wish him a complete, speedy and uncomplicated recovery in the days and weeks ahead, and that those tending to him are granted the strength, knowledge and wisdom to ease his journey back to full health. So thank you very much for your contributions tonight, Rebecca. I hope you enjoy the rest of your half-term break before the college reassembles on Arrivals Day. And I look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you very much, Christopher.
Thank you very much. Good night. And that just about brings us to the end of another Sunday Late Show on Teachers Talk Radio, the home of education conversation. I hope you found this evening's show inspiring and informative, and that you might, if you haven't already done so, find the time to subscribe to our Teachers Talk Radio social media accounts, leave a review of our shows on your preferred podcast provider, or consider getting in touch with a request to appear as one of our guests. If you are a classroom-based teacher or have some other close connection to the teaching profession, then we would love to hear from you. So check out our website at www.ttradio.org and give us the opportunity to put your voice on the air. Thanks again to Rebecca Paterson for tonight's show, and thanks to everyone who has tuned in tonight. Do check out our other Teachers Talk radio shows this week. We have a number of new hosts continuing to make their debuts. So look up the schedule on the website and give them a listen if you can. This week and every week on Teachers Talk Radio, there is simply so much excellent content to engage with from real teachers working with real students in real schools. You can find anything you've missed of the 2,500 shows so far at www.ttradio.org. And if you have something you want to say or ask others about education anywhere on planet Earth, then perhaps you should consider applying to join the station as a show host. We are always on the lookout for those with current or recent experience of the classroom and other less familiar educational settings. Full details can be found on our website, www.ttradio.org. That's all from me for this evening, so thank you for listening, and we will speak again in March. Goodbye.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time. on Teachers Talk Radio.